Let's have a look at Ken Wilber's big claim. By the way, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So, the integral philosopher Ken Wilber has for many years made a big claim, and that claim is that perhaps the greatest discovery of Western psychology in the last 100 years is that we human beings go through the exact same stages of psychological development. Not just in childhood, which has been assumed earlier, but also in adulthood, if and when we develop. And that if we humans get more complex and mature, then we do so in qualitatively different meaning making systems which are sequential, and that these stages are universal. Not only that, he claims that different psychological theorists working largely independently of each other have stumbled upon and discovered the exact same stages of psychological development and the exact same sequential emergence, if you will, of these psychological stages, and that they have done so relatively or wholly independently of each other. Is Ken Wilber right? Because this is a huge, big claim. If you know something about someone's stage of development or action logic or form of mind, that can tell you a lot, not everything, but a lot about a human being and how they make meaning. It can give you good information about how that person is likely to conceptualize conflict, what they view as self and what they view as other, what looks like reality versus what looks like an idea, what they can take perspective on, the relationship to authority, and even how they will conceptualize and make sense out of their own relationships in life. So I've created a little free video series for you guys here on YouTube to do this little developmental journey with me to explore to what extent I think Ken Wilber is right or not. What we'll do is that we will look at three of the most researched, well-known, and widely applied of these adult developmental psychology models. One of them being Robert Kegan's Orders of Consciousness, another one being Clare Graves, whose work has been popularized by Beck and Christopher Cowan under the brand of spiral dynamics. We'll be looking at how Kegan and Graves and spiral dynamics seems to map onto each other. And we will also be looking at ego development theory as pioneered by Jane Loevinger, and that model being further extended by Susanne Greuter in later years. Now, just to set the frame a little bit, because I've made one video for each of these developmental stages, looking at how it seems to map across through these different lenses. So if we look at ego development theory, for example, when Loevinger and Greuter talk about the ego or the self, they refer to essentially a process of identification, the construction of a self, and how that self or selfing process gets more complex and evolves over time. And also the storyteller. There's an assumption that we human beings are storytellers. We tell stories, stories about who we are, where we come from, what's important, where we're going, what's the meaning of life, what might happen after death, And of course, these stories are enormously impactful on our experience. And furthermore, we get socialized into a language, and into that language, our norms and values and expectations and deeper assumptions about reality, which are profoundly impactful. And that by listening to how people speak, how they use language, you can get insights into what people can take perspective on and what they seem to be fused with. There's some assumptions there in ego development theory that when we humans evolve, we go from being kind of egocentric, me centered, to being more us centered, ethnocentric, to becoming more we centered, interdependent, world centric, if you will. That we tend to go from very concrete ways of thinking to more abstract ways of thinking to quite fixed to more dynamic views, to being mostly concerned with the so-called outside world and what we seemingly can just innocently observe with our senses, to becoming more aware of and exploring more of the so-called inner world and the interplay between the two, and how we even might be making up those sorts of distinctions. From being very concerned with our current concerns to having more of perhaps a historical, geographical, evolutionary lens on things, meaning having more perspectives, and just how this process develops. Graves had a model that said that when people have different existential challenges in life, that will tend to activate in us different, let's say, forms of mind or ways of making meaning or value systems. Not only what we value, but how we value. And that when we've solved, at least to some extent, our current existential challenges and get new existential challenges, then we have to kind of find a new set of ways of valuing and conceptualizing our experience. And Kegan, his theory is rooted in subject object theory. Now, before that begins to sound too geeky and too nerdy to you, object just means what you can look at. So if you can, an idea or assumption or expectation or that you can look at and have a relationship to and contextualize, that's something that you can take as object. Subject means that which knows something. So if you're subject to an idea or an assumption, that means that that assumption or idea essentially has you. You're a mouthpiece for it. You're viewing life through it, and as a result, you have no choice about it. So at any stage of development, we will be subject to some assumptions and some ideas, and there will be others that we're able to take as object. And when we make a shift in meaning making or form of mind, what we were subject to, meaning having no choice about, viewing the world through at one stage of development, becomes something that you can take a look at and have a relationship to from the vantage point of a more complex subject. Now, why is this important? Because if you have good information about what someone can take as object and what they're subject to, meaning what type of subject-object balance someone makes meaning out of, that gives you quality information about how that person views conflict. It gives you information about the relationship to authority, responsibility, how they're likely to make sense out of their relationships, what they can take perspective on. Um, and this and not only that, what looks like reality, what looks like self. So essentially, what you're subject to is going to look like a self. It's going to look like who you are. It's going to look like reality and truth with a capital T. What you can take as object looks more like a set of ideas. It doesn't look like reality or who you are in the same way. So, in the first episode, we're going to be exploring early stages of development. Clare Graves' CP, Spiral Dynamics Red System, ego development's opportunist or self centered, self protective uh, stage of development, and also Kegan's stage 2. We're going to look at how they map onto each other, what seems to be different, what seems to be similar, and what we might be able to take from that and claim to be approximately true about us human beings and our meaning making psychologically. I hope you'll enjoy me on this journey, and I look forward to seeing you there.